Extraordinarily creative or extremely stupid. Around here, we pride ourselves in not being able to tell the difference. So when I got the bright idea to Ford Coyote 5.0 swap my Ferrari F355 from salvage auction, I knew it was an idea that just had to come to fruition. Now, whether you love it or hate it, I don't think anyone can deny there's something simply poetic about putting a Ford engine into a Ferrari, but I knew I needed to take things just one step further, and that means a supercharger. This is a Ferrari after all, and it needs the best of the best, which is a VMP Performance 2650. If you're into supercharged performance, you should know VMP's name. They're into anything and everything modern muscle, car, and truck, but they've especially made their name well known with Ford Performance, supplying supercharged kits for every generation of Coyote. Won't be needing this anymore. This is everything that comes with the VMP Gen 3R Supercharger kit. It has a beautiful billet dual throttle body, anodized fuel rails, billet mount for the tensioner brackets, all the way down to the pump for the heat exchanger. Now, all of this, when pushed to the limit, is good for up to 1,200 horsepower. On VMP's drag car, it's been 7-second quarter-mile times. Now, our pulley for this is the 3.5. This is the pump gas pulley. It's going to bring the boost down to a more reasonable level for the fuel that we're going to be running, but this should still be good for almost 700 horsepower. Now, not to interrupt all this cool supercharger talk for too long, but there were a lot of comments about the exhaust system on this car, and the 8-in-1 header collector just showed up. Perfect. With that slight modification to the block, now we can begin to assemble the supercharger kit. This is essentially our lower intake manifold, and it houses our water to air intercooler. Cold liquid is going to come in from our front mounted heat exchanger, and it's going to act to cool the air intake temperature as it passes through the intercooler brick. Now, what heats up the air is the rotors from the supercharger. Heat, unfortunately, is just a byproduct of making boost, and that thing looks awesome. Now, this is definitely the most visually appealing part of this kit, but in order to get this all to work, we have plenty of other things that we need to take care of. So all of this wasn't necessary for the supercharger install, but we are taking care of two known issues on the Coyote. The first one is the timing gear. This is a billet timing gear. These are known to crack and have issues. And similarly, the oil pump gears on the Coyote have the same issue. Now, you just watched us remove those, and I'll explain why momentarily. Now, the reason for that oil pump gear removal is because we're going to be running an external oil pump. This is a dry sump conversion kit by a company called Aviade, and our main reason for doing it is for ground clearance. You can see the difference between the Aviade pan and the factory oil pan is just absolutely staggering. There are many differences and advantages to a dry sump oiling system over a wet sump. Usually the one main downfall is cost, but this is a Ferrari after all, so this is one of those times I'm just going to have to pay up. This is the OEM dry sump tank that came on this Ferrari for the OEM engine. We're hoping we're going to be able to reuse this in its factory location, but we haven't checked the clearances yet. We have a little bit more work to do on this Coyote engine before we can put it in for a test fit. Our supercharger is installed, and we are chipping away at some of the little things that are going to get us to get this thing running. This fuel line at the back comes with the kit. The front, we're doing some slight modifications. We still have to figure out the exact line routing, but basically we're going to have a inlet into the fuel rail. It's going to U around, and then this side is going to be our return, or vice versa. We have plenty of time to get that figured out while we're waiting on a couple parts. You might notice one really important one missing, and that's because of an oversight on my part, because there's only one drive accessory there for one belt, which is the alternator, the water pump, but our supercharger is driven off of what normally would be the AC. So if we want to get this thing to turn, we're going to have to get some sort of drive for it. We just need that pulley that has the extra drive for what would normally be the AC system. Waiting on parts is certainly not going to hold us up from progress, though, and one thing that I've been looking forward to is going ahead and hacking these off. We are planning on running the factory Mustang engine pedestals, and we know that they do not line up with where Ferrari had their engine mounted. Ultimately, we're hoping that we're going to be able to move this up into this area here, but we won't know that until we get this back into the chassis. Does it ever get old, sawzalling on a Ferrari?
Nope.
Test fit number 2. We're back in after some minor additional cutting, and it might seem kind of interesting to start looking underneath the car, but this was arguably the most important spot. This entire project, we've been basing the mounting location around the factory transmission. So one thing we can't change is the center line of the engine, and that means that we were worried about ground clearance, which is why this AVA dry sump conversion was so important. It has allowed us to successfully have not added any additional ground clearance issues. We're actually higher than the transmission pan, which is a giant victory. Now, once we get to the top side, it's hard to look past the VMP supercharger. This is definitely the centerpiece that we were going for. Again, some additional cutting, but the one main point to make is that this appears that it is going to fit under the factory deck lid, which again is just a giant victory. I think the only spot that we're kind of striking out here is with that factory dry sump tank. You can see it's right up against the valve cover. The other thing that's concerning is some of the outlets for the fittings are going to be right where the exhaust header is. So even though it technically fits, I don't think it's going to be functional for this setup, which isn't the end of the world. There's plenty of aftermarket tanks that we can go with. We're just going to have to come up with a creative mounting solution. And speaking of mounting solutions, our engine mounts. We knew that these 2x4s weren't going to last forever, but we finally have all the pieces in place so we can get the height of the engine set. The original plan was to use the factory Coyote engine mounts because they sit so nicely above this Ferrari frame rail. The only problem is actually making all these dimensions work with the height that we have. These are the two pieces of the Ferrari engine mount that we cut off, and we were hoping to utilize this, but the thickness dimension on these is just not going to work with the way things are laid out. But I did find a universal weld-on style Coyote mount that is much shorter than the length of this factory mount, which I think will allow us to hit the center line there, and we'll just re-weld these in place further forward than they were previously. Which means while we're waiting for parts to show up, we have some more cutting to do. We need to get some clearance for our external oil pump, and then also our alternator, which we knew was going to be a clearance issue from the first time we test fit this.
Gets better every time. No fiddle. That's our top bolt. Oh, need more. Remember that little section that you were like, man, we should probably cut out that. We need to cut out that.
Well, we had to cut a lot more than I originally thought, but we have plenty of clearance for our alternator now. Originally, I was hoping to make these symmetrical, but over here on this side, we don't need to take quite that much out for the oil pump. So we're going to basically make the cut that we tried to make for the alternator originally. We'll start there, and I think that's going to be enough clearance for the oil pump. One simple cut, plenty of clearance. Now we just got some welding to do. And just like that, we have our finished product on the engine mounts. They still obviously need a coat of paint or some powder coat, but this came out absolutely fantastic. I know both Tim and I are very happy with the end result here. The layout was great. We did have to remove it so that we can do the finish welding on the top of the bracket that actually attaches to the frame rail. And then Tim also went ahead and did the finish work on the frame rail in the car. Both sides already plated, welded, looking really great, aside from the fact that we had to cut a whole bunch out of it. Our new crank pulley has arrived, and now we have a drive for the Supercharger, which happens to be a completely separate unit from ATI that unfortunately isn't available separately from buying an all-new crank pulley. The only thing we have to do is we need to go ahead and check the installation for the drive for the external oil pump, which unfortunately, from what we can tell already, is going to take some modification. No, Tim wasn't a machinist at his previous job, but he did a pretty darn good job at this. It doesn't necessarily look the best just because of what it is, but the truth is, no one's ever going to see it, so it just needs to be functional.
Doesn't cutting catalytic converters off of cars in the middle of the night count as being a machinist?
No.
No,
No.
Okay.
No.
My mistake.
No, it doesn't.
My mistake.
Offset hole. Offset hole.
Now that we have the drive for our Supercharger installed at the crank, we need to go ahead and figure out all the belt routing on it. We have the standoffs installed for our billet tensioner bracket. This is an additional piece from VMP that is specifically used when you have the deleted AC. It gives you additional belt wrap and just gives all the tension necessary, so this thing can make all the boost necessary. There we go. And now we have our Supercharger system completely mocked up. This billet tensioner is absolutely stout. The amount of belt wrap that we have here, I think we're going to have plenty of tension. We shouldn't run into any slip issues. The only other piece that we need to confirm is our external oil pump, which is going to live in this space down here. And we just need to check our clearances between that drive assembly and the pump.
So this needs to go over this first. Like that.
Well, it is very tight, but it looks like everything is going to work together. The other spot that's slightly concerning is how close that's going to be to the header, but we can move it one bolt hole forward. This shaft here that houses the pulley for the external oil pump, it allows it to slide back and forth. We have some play there, and then you use set screws to go ahead and lock that down. So we'll probably end up bringing the pump a little bit further forward to give that the majority of the clearance that it can possibly have, the most clearance that it can possibly have. But the fact that all of this is working together is pretty awesome, because based on my knowledge from both VMP and Aviade, neither of them has seen this system put together before. I guess a lot of people that are, you know, off-road, either racing with this engine or they're doing a road course style that would want a dry sump system, don't have the supercharger installed, so there's not a need for the AC system. So to see this all together is definitely pretty cool. Equally as exciting, we have some more parts that just got dropped off. Our fuel cell from Radium Engineering is here. Our heat exchanger from CSF just showed up. I also have a set of drop-in radiators from CSF that is on the way, and basically what you're seeing right now is the culmination of months of hard work and planning. To see it all come together in this fashion is truly rewarding. I want to give a special thank you to everyone that's been supporting the project, both the viewers and all the awesome companies that have got involved with just a absolute plethora of awesome parts for this build. All of these clearances here, this was the big stressor. We didn't know if this was all going to work together, so to see this all taken care of is definitely very relieving, but we still have a ton of hurdles to cross with this Coyote Swapped 50. For this video though, Tim gets the last word.
Exhausting, but fun.
That was multiple words, Tim.
Exhausting.